In a custom Minecraft world that I am building, known as the Shattered Lands, I'm going to be adding a forest and grassland area. But first it's all going to start off with a nice blank stone canvas. On this stone plane, I'm going to add a bunch of just little hills and just a little bit of textured terrain that I can then place everything on top of. With that all nice looking good, I'm going to go and paint on the various grass and fun terrain. For this grass, I'm using a combination of grass blocks, moss, and green carpet. I just found it makes a nice kind of grassy texture that just has little bits of variation, like different thicknesses and foliage, like you would find on grass plains or in a forest. Speaking of the forest, I built some custom trees so that we can place them around in whatever areas we want to make the forest. I built a couple of bigger trees and a few smaller ones. That way we have just a nice variety when we place them out around the forest. As you might have noticed, I decided to build the entire forest out of oak trees. That way it's just one nice, similar wood type throughout the entire thing. Now to place these trees, I'm using a tool in this mod called Axiom. What it does is it lets me pre-build something, and then I can just select whatever pre-built things that I want, and it'll place them wherever I decide to in random orientations. This is great for a forest because all those pre-made trees that we had, it will just place and randomly rotate them to give them the randomness that a normal forest would have. Now placing these around, I'm going to leave some gaps for other things that we're going to build. I'm just going to go around and fill out these last couple little places. And with all of these trees, I'm going to add a few on the borders of the other biomes, just off there in the distance, you can see right there. And this forest is already looking pretty good, and we're not done yet. Now on the forest floor here, I'm going to add a bunch of patches of dirt. I'm going to use path, rooted dirt, and regular dirt. And coarse dirt. Why not? Because most forests in real life aren't just completely grass. Oftentimes there's big patches of dirt and just dead branches, parts where there's just not as much grass and life growing. Also at this point I was thinking, this would have been a lot easier if I had done this before I placed all the trees. But you live and you learn from your mistakes. And it still worked. As I was moving around the forest, I decided that these trees need a bit more texture to them. So just every here and there I decided to add some stripped spruce logs. Just kind of give the impression that some of the bark had either fallen off or had just worn away over time in these particular locations, whether it's from the tree being sick or just it happening. I also decided to place some logs around just for some dead trees, add a little bit more to the forest floor, just some dead brush and other things to go around. I also found a couple of spots that I needed to tidy up a bit of the dirt. Went around and added texture to more trees, added more logs. In fact, this one I decided to do kind of a half and half thing on this one on the ground. Like the bug, like there's been some beetles or something that have just kind of eaten away the log. And I added way more texture and way more logs. And now the forest floor is looking pretty good. Now as you're traveling through the forest, I want to make it as rich and exciting experience as I possibly can. I want to have something unique and exciting around every corner so that nothing feels copy and pasted or just the same thing over and over again. So I decided to add just a couple little small structures around. For this one, I decided to add just a fallen over old log. Big, hollow, some grass and moss growing over it. Just something exciting for you to encounter as you're going through the forest, just to breathe more life into the area. Now those of you with keen eyes out there might have been wondering what this big clearing in the forest was going to be for as I was placing the trees. The answer is, it's going to be a lake. Yep, I'm just going to hollow this out, fill it with water. It's just going to be a nice place because eventually we're going to add a village and this is where their water source is going to come from. Speaking of which, we need to add a way for the water to get to the village that we're going to be adding. So we're going to add a nice winding river to the land. And I'm going to have to come in and clean up these trees at some point. But first things first, I'm going to carve out this little winding river, just a nice big curve with a little curve coming off to the edge of the map. Now, yeah, those trees got to go. It was a little bit of a process. Again, would have been easier if I would have placed the trees after doing all of this, but hey, it still worked in the end. Plus you got to see this cool little montage of just going around, zipping through, cleaning up all of the stray little leaves and logs floating about. With the river all cleared up, it's time to fill it right on up. And I just want to float down this river just to see the views and make sure that we're not missing any stray branches or leaves that might be in the way. And I love how it clears up into the sun, just a nice opening here. Eventually we'll have a village there off on the right. On the left, the forest. But here at the end, we still need to clean up and do the end of the river. And I have determined that water is one of the hardest things to get to flow exactly how you want it, but after a long time, I got it looking pretty good. But we are not done there, because this hasn't been textured yet. Who wants a boring lake when you can have a beautifully textured lake that gets darker as it goes to the bottom? The river also needs to be improved. I'm going to add some dirt and gravel to the sides of the riverbank here, and also just all the way down. It's very subtle, but you can see little marks at the bottom as well. Now here, I'm just going to quickly flow all the way through, clean it up a little bit, and get it looking good. This spot specifically needs to be worked on. It needs to be smoothed out, so it's just not a straight drop into the river. And with that, I think it looks good. Now we've got this corruption coming from the mountain, and it's not just going to leave the trees alone. In fact, some of these parts that are going straight through these corrupted veins, I was just going to completely kind of disfigure and warp these trees. That they've been just corrupted by whatever mysterious power is coming from the mountain. And along with this, I'm just going to modify some of the trees around that aren't directly in these veins, but are still pretty close, that the corruption is slowly working its way through it. To give it more life, that this corruption is actually having an effect on the world itself, not just with the mountain, but all of the plant life around it as well. Now it's time to turn our attention to the fun frosty hills of Doom, over off to the side here. And these trees, they need some snow, because they're in the middle of the snow biome, well, I guess the edge of the snow biome, but still, it gets snowed down this far on the mountainside. So I'm going to go and just add a blanket of snow across all of these trees and just kind of blend it in to the current forest and more grassy area that we have. That way it's not such a harsh transition between the two areas, and that it looks more natural and believable. Speaking of believable, we need this forest to be more believable, and the plains next to it. So it needs grass. It needs some natural growth, just to show that it's growing, alive, and happy. In fact, I'm going to add a mix of tall grass, short grass, ferns, and large ferns. And it looks really good. In fact, I want to get crazy and just add a couple little patches of flowers, just for you to find in your adventures as little pockets of joy. Now it's time for my very favorite part of this entire build today. I'm playing with different biomes to change the color of the grass and the leaves throughout the forest. We're going to do a little flyover real quick so you can just see it a little bit better. But the trees close to the forest are a lighter color. The middle of the forest is a much deeper, darker green, and the edges near the plains are a little bit more yellow, just as it's getting to the edge. And I cannot stress how much I love this little change. It's such a small detail, but it makes a world of difference and just brings it all together and flows from one biome to the next so well. And just taking a step back and looking at what we've accomplished today between the lake in the distance, the forest transitioning into the mountains with the snow, and the river that goes off the edge into that huge waterfall. And I love the grass going off the edge of this giant floating land, and I just love this build. This might be my favorite section of the build so far, just because it ties everything together, and I hope you enjoyed it just as much as I did.